Here is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues we need to be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and nobody's going to get cancelled for saying exactly what they think. Keeping me company today is Spectator columnist and political commentator Patrick O'Flynn, and here's what we're discussing on the show. As Boris lands in India to discuss post-Brexit trade, it's politicking as usual back here in the UK with Partygate part whatever. We'll have the latest goings-on from Westminster. And it's happy birthday, Your Madge. The Jubilee celebrations are later this summer, but Queen Elizabeth II has 96 candles to blow out today. Plus, famines, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades. Why war in Ukraine could be about to trigger a global catastrophe. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But what do you need to talk about? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. But first, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. Some news just in. The Met Police say there'll be no further updates on Partygate fines until after May's local elections. The force said investigations into Downing Street and Whitehall parties will continue during the pre-election period, but they'll not issue any new statements. Meanwhile, MPs are still debating in the Commons whether or not there should be an investigation into claims the Prime Minister misled Parliament about lockdown parties. It's after the government withdrew its request to delay the vote. Conservative MPs now have a free vote on the motion after the government's request to delay it was pulled. MPs will vote later this afternoon. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says Labour are playing political games.
Because I think there are so many investigations going on at the moment. The Sugaray report hasn't been published. The police haven't finished their investigations. And I think, dragging this into what is currently a sort of political Punch and Judy match by Keir Starmer doesn't actually get to the bottom of it. So let's get the Sugaray report, police investigation finished. And then as the government's amendment is put before the House today, it doesn't rule it out. It just says, let's wait till it's completed.
And on a key day in the Commons, Boris Johnson's not there. He's in India on a trade visit to strengthen ties with the country. The Prime Minister says he hopes a free trade agreement can be reached as soon as this autumn. He'll hold talks with his counterpart Narendra Modi tomorrow. The Foreign Secretary has announced a wave of new sanctions against Russia. Liz Truss says it'll affect those with Ukrainian blood on their hands. This morning, Russian military abandoned plans to storm a steel plant in Mariupol, where Ukrainian troops are holding out. President Vladimir Putin instead ordered the plant to be blockaded. It's amid warnings the besieged port city could fall to Moscow today. And staying with Ukraine, a military think tank says Russia failed to make any major breakthroughs in its offensive in the eastern regions yesterday. The Institute for the Study of War said Moscow only secured minor gains, including parts of some frontline towns. The Ministry of Defense, meanwhile, warns the Kremlin could be stepping up its offensive ahead of their 9th of May Victory Day celebrations. But Ukraine's military spokesman said troops managed to stop a number of Russian attacks overnight.
In the Donetsk and Tavria directions, the enemy continues to carry out artillery shelling along the entire line of contact. In the Kherson region, the invaders plan to organise the forced mobilisation of the population for war with Ukraine. At the same time, the occupiers set a goal to completely stop the humanitarian support of the region from the Ukrainian authorities.
Back here, the Children's Commissioner says smacking should be banned in England. Dame Rachel de Souza wants the law changed to ensure children and adults share the same protection from assault. Education Secretary Nadeem Sahawi disagrees. He says parents are entitled to discipline their kids. The change would bring the law in line with Scotland and Wales. Northern Ireland is also yet to ban smacking. Chair of the Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon, told GB News it's a topic that must be debated properly.
A child puts his hand on a fire and you automatically smack that child's arm even lightly, would that come under a ban? So this is not an easy issue to pass legislation on. But as I say, if I'm not allowed to smack adults or animals, why should we then say, well, it's okay to smack defenceless children?
A healthcare worker caught COVID-19 twice in the space of 20 days. It's believed to be the shortest gap between infections since the pandemic began. The 31-year-old woman from Spain became infected with the Delta variant, followed by the Omicron strain in under 3 weeks. Researchers say the case shows that even if you've had COVID before and are fully vaccinated, you can't assume you're protected against reinfection. And in sports, Lewis Hamilton and Serena Williams have joined Sir Martin Broughton's bid to buy Chelsea Football Club. The 7-time Formula One world champion and former tennis world #1 are part of a consortium of high-profile investors looking to buy the Premier League club. Sir Martin, the former Liverpool FC chairman, has been on the shortlist to buy the club since Roman Abramovich put it up for sale after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And to mark the Queen's 96th birthday today, a 41-gun salute in Hyde Park in London to honour the occasion. Her Majesty is not in the capital, choosing instead to spend the day at Sandringham in a cottage loved by her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. And a new photo has also been released to celebrate the Queen's birthday today. It was taken last month in the grounds of Windsor Castle. Her Majesty is pictured with 2 of her white fell ponies. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alex, and we need to talk about.
As Boris Johnson arrives in India to kickstart post-Brexit trade talks with our Commonwealth cousins, his MPs back at home are getting to vote on whether the Prime Minister should face a parliamentary scrutiny committee over Partygate, something that could well spell the end of his premiership once it all plays out. Having earlier been urged to delay any inquiry until the boys in blue and Sue complete their probes, Number 10's U-turn on trying to stop the vote probably priced in the backlash that followed when they tried to prevent scrutiny of Owen Paterson. Tory MPs won't be cannon fodder once again. The game of let's wait until, repeated for months, is not going to work anymore. But the desperate flapping of arms by Labour is also pretty sad to watch. Do we think that Boris is a slippery escapologist? Probably. And the public won't forget that quickly. Do we also think that if Labour had anything of merit to offer, they wouldn't need to be pushing playground politics over policies? Probably. Do politicians really think they can manipulate the public and we won't notice? Well, evidently not Boris's backbenchers. The sad truth is, it's a zero-sum game. The likely outcome is a lot of people, like me, won't really want to vote for any of them. Well, let's cross to Westminster and talk to GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood for the latest. Tom, it's all been going on today. I was thinking a while ago that Boris probably would get away with it all, but I don't know. It seems to me the tide is turning.
The temperature has certainly changed in Westminster. Not only is it more sunny outside, it's hotting up inside the chamber as well. It's been the most extraordinary roller coaster over the last 3 days. Alex, when I was on your programme on Tuesday, the Speaker of the House of Commons, of course, announced that Sir Keir Starmer could put forward this motion today. We saw the text of that motion yesterday, that he would be asking the House to refer the Prime Minister to the Committee on Privileges, a very powerful committee to explore whether or not the Prime Minister has misled the House. Then late on Wednesday evening, the Conservative Party put forward what they were proposing to be an amendment to Sir Keir Starmer's motion, to say that it should not take place until after the Sue Gray report has been published and MPs can consider all evidence. Well, extraordinarily dramatically, just 10 minutes before the debate was due to start this morning at 11:30, well, the Tories suddenly pulled their amendment, and they removed the need to whip their MPs as well on this issue, gave their MPs a free vote on this issue, meaning that it's overwhelmingly likely, bar some sort of strange, peculiar miracle, it's overwhelmingly likely that the Labour Party motion will now pass. Indeed, Conservative MPs have been put down on a one-line whip. Many have left the chamber. It seems like the Tory benches are a lot thinner than the opposition benches. Some have frankly gone home. Many will abstain. But some, and indeed a growing number of Conservative MPs who have been speaking over the last few hours, have indeed said they will vote with Sir Keir Starmer, with the Labour Party, for that motion to refer a sitting Prime Minister to the Committee on Privileges. Interestingly, throughout this debate, we have also heard one or two supportive MPs for the Prime Minister, but mostly voices of dissent. And indeed one new voice of dissent, despite saying yesterday in the House of Commons that he was minded to forgive his Prime Minister. Steve Baker, the MP for Wickham, someone who helped get Boris Johnson where he is today, has said that it's time for the Prime Minister to go. A pretty remarkable change, and it seems like the mood in this place has shifted.
Yeah, Tom, thank you very much. Hasn't it shifted indeed? Well, joining me now on the show is Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Kent, Matthew Goodwin. Matthew, something suggests to me that there may have been a flurry of constituency letters that may have prompted Conservative MPs to say to Number 10, not again, don't try and pull the wool over the public's eyes, let this vote pass, and perhaps they've licked their finger, stuck it in the air and realised that the direction of the wind has changed.
Well, I think that's certainly one possibility, Alex. I think also they'll have their minds on the local elections coming up next month, and they'll want to be seen to be perhaps distancing themselves from Johnson. They'll also have looked at the opinion polls, of course, which do suggest that a majority of voters think overall that Boris Johnson should resign, although we should remember most Conservative voters do not hold that view. And so, again, we're down to political positioning. But as you say, Alex, I think probably what we're heading into now is a general election in 2024, perhaps, where large numbers of voters are perhaps feeling increasingly disillusioned with all of the parties, and apathy may end up being one of the big winners here.
Yeah, I mean, look, if this vote passes, which we assume now that it will, and he's dragged in front of the parliamentary committee, and indeed they find out that he is guilty of contempt of parliament, that is lying to the House of Commons, and the punishment could be, 10 days out in the woods, potentially even parliamentary recall in his constituency. It all looks pretty fatal. If you were a betting man, do you think Boris Johnson is likely to be our Prime Minister by the end of the year?
My instinct is Johnson will survive. One of the reasons I say that is because, firstly, we always underestimate Johnson, and he always ends up coming out on the other side. But secondly, and I think more importantly, many of his rivals have sort of withered away. Rishi Sunak has become much weaker in recent weeks. That's reminded the Conservative backbenchers in particular that there isn't really a credible alternative waiting in the wings as such at the moment. And I think also deep down, and I've talked to lots of MPs over recent weeks and months, and my impression is slightly different, perhaps, from your correspondence, in that I still think, actually, a large number of Conservative MPs do sense that Johnson is, in some respects, their best bet, given that if you look at Ben Wallace, if you look at Liz Truss, these are candidates that really don't have a great deal of name recognition, especially in the Red Wall and some of those areas. And also, I think they still perhaps cling to the hope that, given the big internal changes in Number 10, the new advisors, the new operation around Johnson, the plan around Rwanda, the plan for illegal migration, which has gone down relatively well in Red Wall seats. I think those things are still giving Conservative MPs reason just to be cautious and hesitant rather than remove Johnson altogether in the immediate future.
And do you think, Matthew, that this is also having a negative impact on the Labour Party as well, who evidently are trying to profit from the situation? And one can't blame the opposition benches from doing that. But do you think that voters find that rather unsightly?
Well, in some senses, things have got better for Labour. They're doing a little bit better in the polls. Keir Starmer's doing a little bit better in terms of leadership ratings. There's a bit more enthusiasm on the Labour front benches. But having said that, there is still not yet a big public endorsement of the Labour Party and the Labour Party's policies. And I think we can all sort of sense that in our own networks and communities, that people understandably feel very angry with what's happened in Number 10. But I think they also look at the Labour Party and look at the front bench of the Labour Party, look at Keir Starmer perhaps, and they still don't yet have that instrumental reason for endorsing Labour. Now, that may change, and we may be at the beginning of that change. But at the moment, I still personally think Labour still have a lot of work to do in order to get into that position ahead of the next election.
So much for coming on the show. Always great having you on, Matthew Goodwin there. Well, joining me in the studio is political commentator and Spectator columnist Patrick O'Flynn. Now, Patrick, all of this politicking, this domestic heave-ho over Partygate, you'd think it'd be very disruptive to getting things done, but the Prime Minister's out in India trying to working towards a free trade deal at some point. But surely, actually, the public should be reassured that we are now going to begin a process of quite robust scrutiny and watertight procedures, which are designed to protect the integrity of our politics.
I think that's somewhat naive reading that it's about MPs protecting integrity. These MPs are now focused on their own re-election prospects. They will talk in public about things like integrity, but as Matthew was making the point, there's a lot of calculation going on now. I think Boris Johnson is in a bit of trouble this week. Some people pointed out that, when the cat's away, the mice will play was a bit of a thing with Margaret Thatcher when she fell. I don't think he's in that much trouble. But I do think that the Whip's withdrawing the Tory amendment is a sign of a tactical retreat, that too many Tory MPs were saying we're not being tainted by this anymore. So Boris Johnson is in quite some trouble. Personally, I think the real crunch for him comes not this spring, but next spring, when there's still time for the Tories to change leader. But I don't think it'll be on some pious standards thing. It'll be on the numbers of where the polls are and what mood the voters are in.
But if the Parliamentary Committee does indeed conclude that Boris Johnson willfully lied to Parliament, and I think willfully is the key word here, because it's very hard to prove that someone has lied deliberately. You have to be inside their head, really. But if they were to draw that conclusion, we are in extremely unprecedented territory.
I think if they were to reach that conclusion, there would be a no-confidence vote in Boris Johnson. Tory MPs would think the damage was so big that they would indeed dump him. So I now think political correspondents like Tom should be poring over the membership of the Standards and Privileges Committee, because I bet you all the whips of the different parties are, and seeing, have the Tories got the votes to save Boris Johnson, which awkward squad MPs are on that committee. A lot of I think this is where the battle battle is heading on Partygate, absolutely. But if the Standards and Privileges Committee reach an all-party majority verdict that he deliberately misled the House of Commons, I really struggle to see him surviving. So the best chance for the Tories is to subtly nudge their own MPs into line on that committee.
Yeah, well, the parties may be long over, but Partygate certainly is not.
No.
I want to know your views on this. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. If Boris Johnson is found to have willfully lied to Parliament, do you think that should mean the Prime Minister's time is up? You're with GB News on TV and radio. After the break, we're celebrating the birthday of Her Majesty the Queen. But first, let's have a check on the weather forecast.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. Mostly dry on Thursday, plenty of sunshine, but the breeze increasing over the next 24 hours or so. The reason for the settled weather at the moment: low pressure to the south of the UK, high pressure to the north, an easterly flow developing, drawing in quite a lot of dry air at the moment, but we will see changes as we move into the weekend. For Thursday afternoon, plenty of sunshine across the whole of the UK. It will be hazy at times. The easterly breeze just starting to pick up, so noticeable along some eastern coast. Perhaps some low cloud mist and murk holding on across some eastern coast of northeast England here too. Temperatures pegged back 11, 12, 13 degrees. But come further west, temperatures rising 19, 20 Celsius possible, well above average for the time of year. Moderate UV levels too. Through the evening time, some mist and fog starts to develop in one or two spots. Low cloud moving back in off the North Sea down the east coast here, so turning murky as the night goes on. That easterly wind also starting to pick up, becoming noticeable by the end of the night. Temperatures generally into mid-single figures. Towns and cities holding up well above freezing. So a fresh start to Friday morning. A dry, bright start for many, though low cloud across some eastern areas. The southeast seeing some thicker cloud. This pushing its way westwards through the morning into the afternoon. It should break up. However, we will see showers develop here too. One or two of these could be heavy as they move into the West Country, though the Midlands northwards, plenty more sunshine to come. Some low cloud around the coast, keeping it cooler across northeast Scotland, eastern England, but elsewhere temperatures again high teens, well above average. Through the evening we should start to see the showers fade away across southwest England. Elsewhere generally dry, though notice again some low cloud moving in off the North Sea later on. And that will set us up for the weekend itself. Cloudy for many, the risk of a few showers, the best of the sunshine in the east where we'll see the highest temperatures.
I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Alex Phillips on GB News. Do you reckon that Prince Harry's team of Californian therapists have dared point out that he and his wife might be a tad narcissistic? I mean, who temporarily forgets it's their grandmother's birthday in a desperate quest to get some kind of fawning affirmation? It's clear his team of mental health quacks are laughing their way to the bank every time the Duke and Duchess of Montecito empower themselves with a big international media interview, only to get a rightful drubbing the next day. Even more mental health mopping up to do by his shrinks. Never complain, never explain. A right royal life lesson we sincerely wish Harry and Meghan would finally take on board. But to heal ourselves from being subjected to Harry's therapy speak non-interview with some woman who clearly needed a throat sweet, we have a glorious picture of the Queen looking like some Narnia goddess with two magnificent steeds. There she is. Well, let's get the latest from GB News royal reporter Cameron Walker. Cameron, you've been there at the 41 gun salute today.
Yes, I have indeed, Alex. Midday, the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery fired a 41-gun salute, as you just said. 71 horses pulled 6 13-pounder field guns at Hyde Park. They started firing at midday today. There was also gun salutes at the Tower of London and at Windsor Castle. Her Majesty the Queen is at Sandringham today. She made the journey from Windsor Castle yesterday. We believe she's staying at a place called Wood Farm, which is a place where her and her late husband Prince Philip spent much quality time there. A new photo has also been released of Her Majesty to mark the occasion, featuring 2 fell ponies we know that Her Majesty has a passion for horses, and those 2 ponies are actually going to feature in some of the Platinum Jubilee celebrations in June. The Royal Windsor Horse Show is putting on an event called A Gallop Through History, so those 2 horses will take part, as well as 500 other horses as well. So Her Majesty is very much looking forward to that. But for today itself, she's spending the day privately at Sandringham, and no doubt she'll be visited by family and friends very soon.
Any sort of formal response to Harry's interview yesterday? I mean, people must be pretty peeved about his timing.
Well, perhaps behind closed doors, but I think Buckingham Palace still maintains that mantra of never complain, never explain. I think Prince Harry's interview yesterday has a danger to perhaps overshadow Her Majesty's birthday. You've got to question the timing. The interview aired yesterday, the day before Her Majesty's birthday. It aired in the afternoon and therefore ended up featuring on a number of the front pages today, but luckily a number of the papers also chose to include that wonderful image of Her Majesty with those 2 horses. He could have just, Prince Harry could have easily just talked about the Invictus Games during his interviews there. He's at the Invictus Games of Benevolence supporting injured veterans. He's the founder of the Invictus Games, but he decided to bring his family in it once again, like he did with that Oprah interview back in March 2021. And he's again left us on the edge of our seats because he didn't say whether or not he's going to be attending the Jubilee celebrations. We've heard reports that perhaps Meghan and Harry will appear on the balcony at Buckingham Palace behind me for Trooping the Colour celebrations, but we just don't know, and that is an event which, again, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex has the potential to overshadow Her Majesty's special day.
Cameron, thank you ever so much. The flowers behind you looking resplendent there, as are you. Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent. Well, joining me now on the show is royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, let's talk about the Queen's legacy. I mean, 96, that's pretty good anyway, isn't it? But she's the longest reigning monarch in the world now, isn't she? She's got a huge amount of records that she's broken.
Extraordinary. Her legacy, one of devotion to duty and of service. Without any doubt, the Commonwealth would be that which I think she would wish to be remembered for, as well, of course, as a symbol of national unity and of continuity in a time of radical change over the decades. It really is absolutely phenomenal. And a high point, I would suggest, a state visit to Ireland in 2011, which followed the Good Friday Agreement and put the seal on it. Oh, as a figure, the world's best known head of state, there isn't a record that she hasn't broken, but it's the tenacity, it's the consistency, and it's also the fact that she's so deeply loved. I think that those are among the important legacies. There's the walkabout, of course, and the fact the modern monarchy has gradually modernised. There have been problems, of course, as there will be and have been recently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said how well loved she is, because hand on heart, I don't think I've ever met anybody who dislikes the Queen. What is it about her? I mean, is she probably the most loved monarch of the UK, or perhaps anywhere in history?
Well, in history, it's difficult because, I mean, you have, say, monarchs such as Elizabeth I. Was she greatly loved? Hard to say. Was she greatly respected? Well, unquestionably. Victoria was much loved, and yet for so much of her reign, of course, after Albert's tragic death, she was became a recluse, almost a recluse briefly, and subsequently was in black, and it was a different period. And also the Queen's father was, again, so much respected and loved because at a pivotal period in our history, he filled such an important role. I think it was he that, and also her strength and stay, Prince Philip, who was the inspiration, has been the inspiration behind the Queen's reign.
Richard, thank you ever so much. Always delightful to have you on the show, and I hope you give yourself a little glass of fizz to toast the Queen tonight. Well, still in the studio with me, of course, is Patrick O'Flynn. I mean, Patrick, she's just amazing, isn't she? And I think everyone has this sort of feeling inside them that it must have been really tough for her since Prince Philip passed away, and we're all a bit worried about, you know, what happens next.
I think it's been tough for her over more than 70 years. There's that famous footage on her 21st birthday of her promising not just the British people, but the people of all her dominions, that her whole life, whether it be long or short, would be devoted to their service. And, you know, she has more than lived up to that. There have been tough times, obviously, since the death of Prince Philip, and we remember too her mourning alone at the funeral, which certainly puts Boris Johnson and his mates in the shade when it comes to observing those rules that the British people were being asked to observe. She's a very wise leader. I think, actually, she probably deserves the moniker Elizabeth the Great now. We had Alfred the Great. The Russians had Catherine the Great for entirely different reasons. I think we're now looking at Elizabeth the Great, and she's not an ego. She's not like her so-called favourite grandson Harry, who always makes it about him and wants to generate content for his brand. It's about service, and it's about protecting the institution of the crown. The last thing I'll say is that I don't know what the formula is for how many guns salute you get on what birthday, but it seems like a 96th birthday getting 41 guns is a bit of a random number generator. So if any viewer knows what the rules are, what the precedent is for that, I'd be very interested.
I could have asked Richard, Patrick. Well, if you do know what the protocol is for how many guns on which particular denominator of birthday, then do email us in, and also let us know what your birthday message for the Queen is, as well as what her moniker should be. Elizabeth the Great, is that really enough? We can do better than that, can't we? GBViews at gbnews.uk, or of course tweet us at GBNews. You are with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, the warning from the World Bank is bleak. But are we really facing a catastrophic food crisis because of the war in Ukraine? Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Thank you, Alex. It's 2:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Met Police say there'll be no further updates on Partygate fines until after May's local elections. The force said investigations into Downing Street and Whitehall parties will continue during the pre-election period, but they will not issue any new statements. That as MPs are still debating in the Commons whether or not there should be an investigation into claims the Prime Minister misled Parliament about lockdown parties. It's after the government withdrew its request to delay the vote. Conservative MPs now have a free vote on the motion later this afternoon. And on a key day in the Commons, Boris Johnson's not there. He's in India on a trade visit to strengthen ties with the country. The Prime Minister says he hopes a free trade agreement can be reached by the autumn. He'll hold talks with his counterpart, Narendra Modi, tomorrow. The Foreign Secretary's announced a wave of new sanctions against Russia. Liz Truss says it'll affect those with Ukrainian blood on their hands. This morning, the Russian military abandoned plans to storm a steel plant in Mariupol, where Ukrainian troops are holding out. President Putin's instead said it'll be securely blockaded. It's amid warnings the besieged port city could fall to Moscow today. A man has been found guilty of murdering 6-year-old Ricky Neve 28 years ago. James Watson, now 41 but 13 at the time of Ricky's death, was found guilty by jurors at the Old Bailey in London this afternoon. The schoolboy disappeared in November 1994 and his body was found in woods near his Peterborough home. And to mark the Queen's 96th birthday today, a 41-gun salute in Hyde Park in London to honour the occasion. Her Majesty's not in the capital, choosing instead to spend the day at Sandringham, a cottage loved by her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. It follows a new photo released also to celebrate the Queen's birthday today. Taken last month in the grounds of Windsor Castle, Her Majesty is pictured with 2 of her white fell ponies. TV Online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. It's back to We Need to Talk About with Alex in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
Welcome back. All eyes have been on the widespread ramifications of war in Ukraine in Europe. Monstrous energy bills, inflation, the impact of sanctions, the existential fear that Mad Vlad could at any moment up the ante. But as two major food and fertilizer exporters for the world, the war between Russia and Ukraine is likely to have an even more devastating impact on the planet's poorest. As African drought, locust infestations and famine loom annually, the fear is that countries that routinely face starvation will be gravely hit. The United Nations Food Programme, which feeds 125 million of the world's hungriest, sources around half of its grain from Ukraine. As war continues to rage thousands of miles away, other parts of the world could be dragged into a catastrophe on a global scale. But joining me now on the show is Conservative MP for Mid Derbyshire and member of the Department for International Development Committee, Pauline Latham. Pauline, delighted to have you on. This isn't really being spoken about enough, is it? The fact that we know that there are countries out there that we give aid to, that we help our Commonwealth cousins who regularly face food crises, droughts and so forth. But we've not really been talking about the impact of this war in Ukraine on them.
I think it's going to have a global impact. It's going to impact us too, with higher prices. The fact is that if something catastrophic happens anywhere in the world now, it is going to affect the whole world, because we're a much smaller world than we used to be, and we're less self-sufficient. And certainly African countries do struggle to grow their crops, and maybe our aid ought to be concentrated on making sure they can grow crops so that they can be self-sufficient. So our aid maybe needs to change now, rather than it just be in food, and it will still have to be in food. But I don't think most people have been aware that we get so much of our grain from Ukraine, and indeed the world from Russia. And that's a huge problem now for the poorest of the poor.
I mean, do you think that this is the right time then for the cutting of foreign aid? I mean, I know it comes under a lot of criticism for how it's spent and whether it goes to despotic regimes with space programs and so on and so forth. But we surely have a duty of care to some of our former colonies who are going to face absolutely dire circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. And I did vote against the cut in aid, and I still think it's the wrong thing to do, because we're actually having to put money into aid into Ukraine now. So I don't want that to be taken out of the same budget. It needs to come from a different budget, because it will impact the poorest. And I know the Foreign Secretary is well aware of this, and she's looking at how she can mitigate it. But I think we need to focus very hard on how grain can be grown elsewhere, so that the poorest countries can have a share of it grown elsewhere, because it's clear that Ukraine cannot focus on growing grain this year because they've got this war going on, and Russia also will struggle. People really won't want to buy Russian grain. They're going to want to buy Ukrainian grain, but if it's not there, it will impact on every single person in the world, I believe, but of course much worse on the poorest of the poor. It will affect our cost of living crisis, because bread and pasta prices will rocket.
I mean, Brits at heart are an extremely charitable bunch, aren't we? And certainly when there are big appeals, when we look back at, the famous ones like Live Aid, so on and so forth, people have dug deep to help those most in need. Is the government prepared to do the same? Are there already conversations taking place about how we're going to help people who potentially face starvation?
Well, I know, speaking to the Foreign Secretary yesterday, she is well aware of the grain crisis, and I know that she does not want it to impact on the poorest of the poor. So I'm sure she's having those conversations, because we can't afford for that to happen. We don't want, because that will cause more migration. If people can't eat in their country, they'll go somewhere where they can. And if we can't get the aid to places, they will move on. And that is devastating for every person that it happens to, because they're moving out of their own country, leaving their homes, leaving everything, and schooling, healthcare, the whole lot is impacted. So I hope that we are going to be able to think very hard about how we can get grain grown elsewhere so that we don't have to rely on Ukrainian grain. And I'm sure that the Foreign Office are looking very hard at that because, of course, they control the budget that used to be controlled by the Department for International Development.
Pauline, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you for your very first appearance, actually, on We Need to Talk About. And let's catch up again soon, because I'm sure this story is going to start making headlines. That's Pauline Latham there, who is the Conservative MP for Mid Derbyshire and member of the Department for International Development Committee. Well, political commentator and Spectator columnist Patrick O'Flynn is still with me. Patrick, I'm sure people at home will just be groaning, going, oh, here we go, more famine in Africa, more starvation. But it is set to be extremely acute with what's going on. It's something I care tremendously about, because I've lived in various different African countries. I've seen the struggle with my own eyes. And actually, as woke as it may sound, I understand the lineage of why those countries are in crisis, in no small part because of our previous rule of those countries. Do you think that media and the government need to be turning their attention to this, or are you more charity starts at home?
Well, I'm certainly more charity starts at home in terms of government of nation states has a primary duty to its own people. But it's certainly also true that we are facing global food price hikes, and it's not just Ukraine and Russia. China's going hell for leather for a zero COVID approach at the moment, which is hindering its own farmers' ability to grow crops and its own fertiliser production, and that's going to have a knock-on effect as well. Just slightly to go against your so-called woke onslaught there, I do note that there are various countries in Africa, Zimbabwe and South Africa, come to mind, where experienced and capable white farmers are being chased off farms, and one consequence of that sometimes is that the productivity of the land plummets. There's also all sorts of corruption going on in Africa with property rights not secured, and that also predicates against all kinds of economic development, including agricultural development. I also think maybe we're coming to a bit of an end of a trendy era in this country, where we seem to be more obsessed with paying farmers not to grow food and to set things aside than we are to grow food. And I think the whole crisis shows, again, a drawback and a limitation of globalisation. All is fine as long as everyone's behaving in the world, but the brittle nature of these extended supply lines should tell every country to focus on becoming more self-sufficient in food.
And going back to the very knotty issue of foreign aid, it never really plays well, I'd imagine, particularly with our viewers who are probably delighted to see the foreign aid budgets cut and certainly don't think it should go towards despotic regimes. But when you hear of these sort of looming famines, the sort of which we saw in the 80s, 90s in Ethiopia, the horrible images of starving children, do we have to actually at some point say, foreign aid is still absolutely vital in the 21st century?
Well, look, I think food aid to help communities and countries that are struck by famine absolutely is, but emergency aid, but ongoing, this idea of providing ongoing, crutch, the risk is it props up despotic regimes, it props up corruption, and it actually encourages or enables bad regimes to get away with not focusing on the steps they really need to take to allow their own countries to advance. So, I'm sort of leaning towards trade, not aid, and allowing people in countries to have their talents unleashed, and not be robbed blind by an elite African ruling class lining its own pockets. I think that is the biggest factor in the continued immiseration of some African countries.
Patrick, thank you ever so much. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Also, keep them coming in on everything we're talking about. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Lorraine says, I'm being persuaded to definitely vote Boris back in a world where Starmer won't even say the definition of a woman. We need someone who isn't afraid to push some rules. If Boris hadn't taken the lead from Theresa, Brexit would never have happened. Carol says, if the Tory backstabbers go against the PM, I, for one, and I know many more, won't vote Conservatives again. For Boris to go over a poxy piece of cake is pathetic. Heaven forbid if Labour get in. Paul says, the Queen is my boss as a former British soldier. I love her so much. Us soldiers would die for her. That's how much she's loved. Oh, how nice. That brought a tear to my eye. I'm telling you, we do love her indeed. Now, it's that time of the show when I get to let off steam about the stories that have wormed their way under my skin, and like a bad case of scabies, there are many. If the modern world is as disturbing to you as it is to simple creatures like me, relax, sit back, and know that you're in good company. Now, it's happening again, isn't it? The lazy tropes, the repeated right-on attack lines, the establishment and their desperate soundbites slavishly lapped up by the metropolitan media elite. I'm talking about the French elections. You could play bingo with the Marine Le Pen attacks resonating around the West. I call Russia, racism, the dangers of leaving the EU, Islamophobia, and, of course, far right for a full house. Whether or not any of these accusations have any merit no longer even feels like the point. The usual characters in the media just don't want to explore any other viewpoints and give their audiences a balanced appraisal of what a Le Pen presidency might mean. Yet, if anything is going to guarantee she walks straight into the Élysée Palace, it's the sniffy, snobby headlines churned out by the same self-righteous journalists that thought that by demonising Brexit, it would banish it. Now, if you haven't heard already, a sick family sex show at a theatre in Bath has caused such controversy, it's been pulled. Thank goodness. The show wanted to teach 5-year-olds about everything from being gender fluid to masturbation to a glossary of sexual terms that I probably can't even mention on TV before the watershed, if at all, without Ofcom taking us off air. The company behind the production also joyfully promoted accompanying workshop material online, encouraging toddlers to make Play-Doh genitals and sing songs about touching themselves. In a post-Savile world, you would think this stuff couldn't pass muster. Yet astonishingly, the production actually received Arts Council and lottery funding, which means some perverted adults somewhere think taxpayer cash, your cash, should be spent on stripping all safeguards and exposing little kids to a world of adult fetishes. It's not enough to simply celebrate the fact that a petition has seen off this threat to society. I personally think an inquiry should be held into how this was ever approved, and heads should roll. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually broke the law on child protection. What so-called liberal progressives are now trying to do to kids is downright criminal. A US congressman has urged Joe Biden to ban 6 UK lawyers who've been coining it from Russian oligarchs by slamming American journalists with lawsuits to silence them. It's high time we followed suit. There's an entire underbelly of unscrupulous spin doctors and lawyers in London shilling for Kremlin appeasers who have made our capital their home. If you're profiteering from willfully pushing back against the law of the land, especially for such notorious characters whose tendrils are connected to the sort of atrocities being meted out in Ukraine, then surely the government has every right to blacklist your company and publish your name. Yes, in law, everyone deserves defence, but it wouldn't hurt these firms to have to prove they have openly vetted their clients. Problem is, a lot of them have other clients sitting pretty in big political parties. Now, if you've got a Twitter account, I implore you, right now, log in and follow a rather marvellous account called Libs of TikTok. If you want to be exposed to the lunacy of woke America in all of its garish monstrosity and feel somewhat relieved that you live this side of the pond, it is an absolute treasure trove of nut jobs. It's like the digital equivalent of a good bog book. Well, the ever-woke Washington Post outed the account's founder in a newspaper exposé, no doubt to instigate a cruel social media pile-on. Kind of backfired, though. As a result, followers of the account have been multiplying. Join the revolution. Patrick O'Flynn, what do you want to pick up from all of that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about the so-called family sex show. I think the sexualisation of children, there are certain things which should be taboo and that we should maintain the taboo, and we shouldn't kind of back off in the face of this so-called progressive liberalism. I think you're absolutely right. Heads should roll at Arts Council England, and anyone in charge of public money being directed into such things. It makes my blood boil. And we're supposed to have, a conservative administration in this country, and clearly a lot of our public realm is just infested with far left people. And one of the most sinister things, I think, is this pushing of kind of inappropriate sexual imagery at children. So I couldn't agree with you more on that particular issue.
And the French elections, when you look at sort of the newspaper headlines emerging in this country, does it give you PTSD and remind you of those good old Brexit days?
It certainly was one of the attempts to suppress UKIP in the sort of pre-Brexit campaigning days, from Michael Howard to David Cameron, was to throw out the idea to kind of leave-minded people that this wasn't a respectable party. So UKIP, when I was in it, called far right, fruitcakes, loonies, closet racists, cranks, gadflies. It was all done to try and hit a segment of the electorate who agreed with the agenda, but say these people aren't respectable. And they do it with Madame Le Pen, and obviously far right is one of the things they say. She's come in the top two of two successive presidential elections, so she is part of the mainstream. I do see her past support and praise of Vladimir Putin as a big Achilles, and taking money from Russia as big Achilles heels. And I suspect that will be a major thing if she falls short this time. But she's going to do a lot better than she did in the final round 5 years ago when Macron won by 2-to-1 ratio. And I personally think that she is on the way. She's grown in authority, and in 5 years' time, I expect her to fight her way to the last two and possibly be the favourite to win. I think it's a matter of time before the so-called populist right comes to ascendancy in France.
Patrick, it's been wonderful having you join me in the studio again. We'll have you back very soon. That's about it for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About It on GB News. Same time, same place, 2 o'clock tomorrow. But of course, you know that. Coming up next, it's the briefing with Darren McCaffrey. But first, let's have a little look at the weather forecast. It looks pretty nice.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. Mostly dry on Thursday, plenty of sunshine, but the breeze increasing over the next 24 hours or so. The reason for the settled weather at the moment: low pressure to the south of the UK, high pressure to the north, an easterly flow developing, drawing in quite a lot of dry air at the moment, but we will see changes as we move into the weekend. For Thursday afternoon, plenty of sunshine across the whole of the UK. It will be hazy at times. The easterly breeze just starting to pick up, so noticeable along some eastern coasts. Perhaps some low cloud mist and murk holding on across some eastern coast of northeast England here too. Temperatures pegged back 11, 12, 13 degrees. But come further west, temperatures rising 19, 20 Celsius possible, well above average for the time of year. Moderate UV levels too. Through the evening time, some mist and fog starts to develop in 1 or 2 spots. Low cloud moving back in off the North Sea down the east coast here, so turning murky as the night goes on. That easterly wind also starting to pick up, becoming noticeable by the end of the night. Temperatures generally into mid-single figures. Towns and cities holding up well above freezing. So a fresh start to Friday morning. A dry, bright start for many, though low cloud across some eastern areas. The southeast seeing some thicker cloud. This pushing its way westwards through the morning into the afternoon. It should break up. However, we will see showers develop here too. 1 or 2 of these could be heavy as they move into the West Country, though the Midlands northwards, plenty more sunshine to come. Some low cloud around the coast, keeping it cooler across northeast Scotland, eastern England, but elsewhere temperatures again high teens, well above average. Through the evening we should start to see the showers fade away across southwest England. Elsewhere generally dry, though notice again some low cloud moving in off the North Sea later on. And that will set us up for the weekend itself. Cloudy for many, the risk of a few showers, the best of the sunshine in the east where we'll see the highest temperatures.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can